The one number which will horrify Australian children. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. Hello, John.
Hello, sir.
Well, back to economics today and big numbers.
Yes. I had the opportunity about a week and a half ago to present at my first seminar for 2021. So it's been a long time between drinks given COVID-19 restrictions. But I provided sort of my revised or my new thinking about where the Australian economy is up to. And there was one number that I presented that shocked the audience. And that number is what we're going to talk about today, because not only is it shocking for our viewers who are adults, but for my children and for the children across the country, what we're about to go through is horrifying, I would say. And in the case of my children, I think their financial futures have been completely ruined.
And this is the point, isn't it? Because the debt is big, but the tail is very, very long. And that's the problem. It's actually an intergenerational problem.
Yes. Well, we haven't actually sort of described to the viewer as to what is the number, but the number we're going to actually present, which, like what I found in my seminar was that no one has really sort of presented the number to the Australian people, not the government, not the press, and not even mainstream economists. But we're going to look at what I would call the third debt bubble that has emerged in the Australian economy. So just to take our audience back, so the very first show we did in about maybe June of 2018 was about household debt, which was a long time ago. And then when you invited me to come back for a second show, we talked about foreign debt. And back in 2018-19, I said Australia has two debt bubbles, a household debt bubble and a foreign debt bubble. And you can look at historical as well as looking at other country metrics, and you can see we have elevated levels versus income versus GDP, etc. I've now come out and said, well, we have a third debt bubble as a result of COVID-19, and that is public sector debt. And the number that I presented was how much additional debt have Australia's 9 governments, so the federal government, the 6 states, the 2 territories, how much have they accumulated as a result of COVID-19? And from what I can tell, no one has really sort of looked at the numbers and actually come to some sort of thinking as to, well, how much is that debt and what are the implications for the economy, but also for both current and intergenerational sort of implications.
And it's very important people understand that, because there's often these little pockets of debt down at the state level, and then there's a big pocket of debt at the federal level. But of course, quite often they only talk about the current flow of debt rather than the accumulated stock of debt, right?
Yes.
And so what we're doing is basically pulling all of those stocks together and thinking about the quantum of that number. Remember, that debt has to be paid back at some point.
Yes. Unless if you believe in MMT, and then nothing has to be paid back.
Yes.
So without further ado, Martin, what I'm going to do is now let's put up slide 1 for our audience, and this number I'm presenting is from July 2019, so the beginning of the financial year before COVID, through to June 2024. And the reason why we've picked that time frame, which is effectively 5 financial years, is that's what the budget numbers for all of the various governments have projected to. And what I've calculated is that once you add the additional debt, so we're not talking about the total number of total debt, we're just talking about how much additional debt has been accumulated by these 9 governments. The number is $975.8 billion. So almost $1 trillion in response to COVID-19. And one of the big points that I made to this audience I presented to in Adelaide was that what was the purpose of accumulating this debt? It was, in effect, to save the banks. Because we know from the Irish experience, if you have a sharp rise in unemployment, which was the lockdown implication, you will see a massive increase in delinquencies and defaults. And if you have a critical mass of defaults, that's when the financial system becomes in peril on a systemic basis. And that's when you're going to see a complete meltdown of the debt bubble, a meltdown of the banks, a meltdown of the property sector, and so obviously they thought that they needed to respond to COVID-19 in an aggressive fashion, and we've already sort of spoken on previous episodes that the response was not, in my view, not commensurate to the public sector risk, or sort of to the risk of public health. But the reason for the stimulus, and so this is one of the key points I continued to hammer home in my seminar, was it was not to save the Australian people. It was to save the banks. And we know that with this Prime Minister in particular, he is joined at the hip with the big four banks, and this was all about saving their bacon, and it's come to the tune of almost $1 trillion over 5 financial years.
Yeah, and of course, over there in RBA land, there's another 95 billion that's being pushed to the bank through the TFF, right?
Yes.
Another 95 billion to go until the end of June when it ends. So in addition to this debt pool, there are other things they did too to protect the banks.
Of course, yes. So what we're just talking about is effectively fiscal policy,
Yep.
but there was a whole host of measures around monetary policy that the RBA and APRA and other institutions implemented as well.
Yep.
So just so we can explain to the audience, so how did I get this large number? So pretty much what I did was I looked up. So in the case of the federal government, I looked up what the level of debt was starting at July 2019, and pretty much we were at about $546 billion gross debt, so $500 billion at the start of July 2019. Then what I've done is I've looked at the projections out to June 2024, and the projection according to the budget that was released last October was that gross debt would reach 51.6% of GDP. So I took the GDP number from the ABS, used the growth numbers from the budget, forecasted what GDP would look like in June 2024, and then I just calculated that by 51.6% to come up with the federal number. Now, so that's what I did with the federal budget, because the federal budget doesn't actually specify a gross debt number for the fiscal year 23-24. So that's how I calculated that. Now, a slightly different approach with the state and territory government. So let's actually put up slide 2. So slide 2 actually has the accounting framework for what state and territory governments use. And so typically, so the government services that we expect is what they call the general government sector. But typically, particularly when it comes to infrastructure, state and territory governments can be very effective of hiding cost and hiding debt by pushing expenditures into various non-financial companies that they own. So I thought to myself, well, we're not going to allow them to get away with that trick. So what I did was I said, well, let me look at the borrowings from July 2019 to June 2024 on the total non-financial public sector level. So that's the general government sector and these non-financial corporates, and see how much additional debt they have accumulated. So I basically, and again, anyone can do this exercise. So you basically have to download all of the various state budgets. So basically 6 states, 2 territories, find what the borrowings were at the end of fiscal year 18-19, so June 2019, and then start to look at the projections and basically calculate for each government how much increase in debt, add them all up, add them up to the federal level, add them up to the federal number, and that's where you get $975.8 billion. And when I so I had a bit of a breakdown in the numbers with the audience, and when I sort of looked at these people and said, well, how do you think we are going to pay this back as a country? Look, a lot of people didn't have a lot of answers, and one thing I would say, Martin, is that over the last few days, I had a conversation with a Canberra Press, a journalist from the Canberra Press Gallery, and I actually asked him this question: how much additional debt did Australia's 9 governments accumulate as a result of COVID-19 over 5 financial years? And he didn't know the answer. When I told him, I basically said that you and your profession have completely failed the public interest, because the Australian people do not know the scale of the damage that the Australia's political class has done to the country, and that lack of knowledge and acknowledgement of the scale of this fiscal disaster is basically at the feet of the media, who refuse to actually do proper economic research and actually tell the public what has really happened over the last 12 months.
Well, certainly very few of them are prepared to ask any hard questions of the government or the Reserve Bank. They all sort of just roll over and just follow suit. My other question, John, is there's a bit of a trick that governments use quite often where they move stuff from the current account to the capital account, right? Because then they only have to pay the flow rather than repay the stock. So are these numbers including that, or is there another capital amount over there as well?
So if there is capital expenditure that is in this sort of non-financial sort of arena, then those capital expenditures are being included.
Okay.
So particularly a number of the state governments, and we covered this in some shows last year.
Yep.
In terms of increasing public sector expenditure on infrastructure, and the Reserve Bank using QE to finance some of that spending. That is expenditure of a capital nature, and some of that would be pushed into some of these non-financial corporates, but they're owned by state and territory governments, and so that has been obviously included in these numbers as well.
Okay, right, and the debt would obviously be things like the government issuing bonds and those sorts of things, right, and borrowing from overseas, all of those things.
Yes. Well, yes. So obviously the question is who's the lender to these various governments. So yes, there are domestic banks, there are domestic insurance companies, superannuation, obviously for overseas investors, and perhaps a conversation for a different show. But if you look at the breakdown of the foreign debt in the last 12 months alone. So remember, this is numbers over 5 financial years, but the last 12 months there has been a substantial increase in the public sector contribution to the foreign debt. So governments have borrowed, I think from memory, about $134 billion from overseas investors. And on top of all of that, whatever shortfall there was, it was made up by the Reserve Bank of Australia by basically printing money out of nothing and doing QE.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got this big wodge of debt, which nobody's really across or sensitive to or aware of. Frydenberg this last week just said, well, we need to actually let the unemployment rate drop to much lower. In other words, he's going to do more of it. So in this budget, you would expect bigger debt.
Yes. We'll have to see what happens in terms of the upcoming federal budget. But obviously there is a view that imposing austerity or imposing cuts, one from an economic point of view, but particularly as we head to the next federal election, that is bad, both economics and politics. Dare I say, it's more of a political calculation than it is an economic calculation. But again, for those who have children, what is going to become of us? And I'm in my late 30s, and obviously if you have children, what's going to happen of the children? How do we pay this back? Because the other key point I want to make, Martin, is that of these 9 governments, there's only one government that I can see that has, in these outer years of 23, 24, have actually a projected surplus, and that's the government of Western Australia. And obviously, as we see this stagflation come out, as I've been stating, and we see rising commodity prices, states that are resource rich, particularly like Western Australia, will have increased royalties, and they'll have a greater ability to balance the budget. So one of the other big dilemmas in this whole conversation is, well, one question about how do you repay this, but before you even get to that stage, well, how are you going to balance the books? And again, whether Western Australia can actually balance the books or not, we'll have to see. But they have a forecast that they will. But all the other state and territory governments basically see red ink for the next 4 years, as well as the federal government. And in the case of the federal government, New South Wales and Victoria, that red ink is substantial, continually going out. And the question is, well, how big will this debt burden be by the time we get to June 2024? Because we have a projected number based on the numbers that have been published, But if everyone says, well, we can't have austerity and the economy doesn't recover as expected, one could expect that this number is going to be well north of $1 trillion.
And there's another trap for the unwary here, and that is that the interest rates are very, very low at the moment, right? The interesting question is, how low will they be in 3, 4, 5 years' time? Because, of course, if rates start going up, then the cost of the debt, particularly as you roll it, is going to go up.
Yes.
Which means that essentially we could be not only burdened with trying to make those repayments, but we're trying to actually service the debt at a higher interest rate.
Indeed. Now, one important point to make is last year we had a number of economists, including Chris Richardson from Deloitte Access Economics, come out and say that no need to worry about this debt because we had a bigger deficit, we had bigger debt, public sector debt after World War II, and we were able to grow ourselves out of it. And now we did a show last October where we actually went through the key factors that led to that outcome in the 25 years after World War II. And my conclusion on that episode was that we cannot replicate because there was a number of unique things in terms of population growth and a whole host of other factors. So if anyone hears over the next month, particularly after the federal government budget is released, don't worry, we're going to grow ourselves out of it like we did after World War II. That is completely a fraudulent and bogus argument, and I think we have some really big problems that as a community we need to start thinking about, because if we allow these politicians to continue to run public sector finances into the ground, not only are we going to have Ireland, in the case of, for example, the household debt bubble becoming an issue, we could also see a situation like Greece in 2012. And in modern economic history, I don't think we've seen a combination of households being in some sort of systemic crisis as at the same time that the government is in a systemic crisis as well. So anytime there's, for example, when Ireland was in trouble, when America was in trouble with their housing markets, they basically used the balance sheet of their governments to basically get them out of trouble. Well, we're racking up so much debt that if we had some sort of situation, I don't think we have a lot of ammunition left. And then the question is, well, where do we go from there?
And of course, we've got corporate debt, household debt, and now public sector debt, right? So the three tiers, if you like, of debt, right, all of which are massive. That total amount of debt has never been seen before.
Exactly.
In Australia.
Exactly. And because, so again, just to go back, Harry Dent's forecast is deflation. Deflation means that you shrink the debt. Now, there is no possible way to do this in an orderly fashion. So if it's disorderly, if it's a financial crisis, deflationary depression, that's the only way. But obviously the purpose of incurring so much debt in the public sector in the last 12 months was to ensure that Harry's forecast doesn't come true. So the only way we can finance ongoing, everlasting, increasing debt, whether it's household foreign debt, corporate or government, is to continue to print money, and that historically is obviously inflationary. This particular number suggests that we're going to continue to see a cost of living inflationary problem going forward that's going to intensify. And so far, there is no evidence that the deflationary case is going to play out.
And I'll just make one final point, John. A lot of the debt that was incurred wasn't actually an investing in the future. It wasn't laying for future growth, right? It was basically getting us through the immediate crisis and handing out money to big business and what have you, right? So we've actually got very little to see for all that debt that's been created. So not only is the number big, but the positive contribution to the economy, structurally speaking, is very low.
Yes. A lot of the money was not in public sector investment. Yes, there was a lot of corporates that got some help through JobKeeper, but a lot of households were given a income boost so that they wouldn't default on particularly mortgages. And again, it was to save the banks. and we have little to show for it. We have no plan to balance the budgets. In 8 of the 9 governments, there's no plan to pay back the debt. And if you have a child in Australia today, the politicians have destroyed your child's future. And that's a very serious situation.
Yeah, John, it is, unfortunately. Very important we underscore it. People, wake up. This is a really important issue. And I guess we'll come back to it as things develop. But the pile of debt is huge.
Absolutely.
Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of people, we'll see you next time.